Hello Year 11, this is now lesson 3 in the unit B2.5 response and regulation. In this lesson we're going to have a look at some of the factors that will affect your reaction time, and then we're going to do some past paper questions based on what we've covered in these first 3 lessons on the nervous system. First thing that we need to do today is to go over this page that I asked you to complete at the end of last lesson. So on here we have these keywords that we've been learning about in the previous 2 lessons, and I asked you to match up the words with their definitions. So as you can see on the screen, this is on page 11 in your books, I've numbered the words and we're now going to number the definitions. So number 1, neuron, you should have that matched up with a specialised nerve cell. So a neuron is a specialised nerve cell. Number 2, synapse is a junction between 2 neurons or 2 nerve cells. So if you remember from the first lesson, when an impulse gets to the end of one nerve cell, there is a gap then before the next nerve cell which the electrical impulse is not able to pass over. So instead, a chemical called a neurotransmitter would be released from the end of one neuron to travel across that gap. The third word then is receptor, so you should have receptor joined up with the bottom definition there, specialised cells that detect stimuli. So you would have receptors in your sense organs and they would be detecting those changes in the environment. Number 4, the sensory neuron should be joined up with this one here. This carries the nerve impulse from the receptor to the central nervous system. Motor neuron then is number 5. The motor neuron is the neuron that carries the nerve impulse from the central nervous system to the effector. Number 6, reflex. So this is what we were looking at last lesson. Reflex actions would be an automatic response to a stimulus, doesn't involve conscious thought. So these are the ones we were looking at last lesson, where you are reacting to something without thinking about it. Number 7 is the relay neuron. So the relay neuron connects the motor and the sensory neurons in the central nervous system. So that's part of the reflex action, where the information doesn't go to the brain, it just travels along a relay neuron within the spinal cord. Number 8, stimulus is a change in the environment. So a stimulus could be light, it could be sound, which your body then is able to react to. Number 9, effectors should be joined up with this one, that they carry out the response and are either muscles or glands. So the information, if you remember, in a reflex action, the stimulus is detected by the receptors, the information travels along the sensory neuron, then the relay neuron, then the motor neuron to the effector, which will cause a response. The central nervous system then, number 10, should be matched up with the brain and the spinal cord. Number 11, a nerve is made up of a bundle of neurons or nerve cells. And then finally, the nerve impulse, number 12, is an electrical message that passes along a neuron. Okay, so we're going to now move on to today's lesson. We need to be looking at page 12 in the booklets. And what we're going to be doing today is to investigate the factors that will affect reaction times. So obviously a reaction time is how quickly your body responds to a stimulus. So for example, if you notice a ball moving towards your head, the time it takes from when you first notice the ball to when your arm reaches up to catch it is an example of a reaction time. If you're driving a car and you notice something's come out in the road in front of you, your reaction time would be the time it takes for you to notice that and to put your foot on the brake to stop the car. So even though nerve impulses obviously travel very quickly through your nervous system, your body doesn't react instantly. It takes time for the message to go from the receptor to the brain and for you to process that and a response to happen. It's a very quick process. We're talking milliseconds, but it's not instant. So in this activity, you're going to conduct a simple measurable experiment to study reaction times. And the hypothesis we're going to investigate is that your reaction time will improve with practice. So by repeating the same activity, your reaction time will improve. That's our hypothesis for today. It's a really simple experiment which you can do at home if you have a ruler, preferably a 30 centimetre ruler, but a 15 centimetre ruler should be okay. You will also need someone else though to help you. So if there's someone there at home that can help you and you've got a ruler, you can get a set of results for yourself. I will provide a set of results, however, for those of you who are not able to do the experiment yourselves. So we're just going to watch now a short video explaining what we're going to actually do.
We get there. So sit down on a chair with good upright posture and eyes looking forward. Place the forearm of your weaker arm across a table with your hand overhanging the edge. Your partner will hold a ruler vertically with the bottom end, that's the end with the 0 centimetres, in between your thumb and your first finger. Practice holding the ruler with those two fingers. Your partner will then take hold of the ruler and ask you to remove your fingers. So your partner will then hold the ruler so the 0 mark is level with the top of the thumb, and they will tell you to prepare to catch the ruler. Your partner will then drop the ruler without telling you. You must catch the ruler as quickly as you can.
Boom!
So if you caught the ruler, you want to look at the number level with the top of the thumb. In this case, it's 20 centimetres. Wait to record that in your results table.
Okay, so this is the method that we're going to use for our experiment. You've got this on page 13. So if you have someone who can help you, then this is what you need to follow. So ask your volunteer to sit in a chair with good upright posture and eyes looking across the room. They need to place their forearm, so the part of the arm from the elbow to the hand, so it extends over the edge of the table. Ask them to place their thumb and index finger on either side of the bottom of the vertically placed ruler. The number 1 should be at the bottom and the number 30 near the top. Let your volunteer practice holding the ruler with those two fingers. Now ask your volunteer to remove their fingers from the ruler while you continue to hold it so that the bottom of the ruler is at a height of about 2 centimetres above the fingers. Obviously that's going to be quite hard for you to judge exactly. Tell the volunteer that you will release the ruler without warning. Their job will be to catch it between their thumb and forefinger as soon as they sense it dropping. Drop the ruler. When your volunteer catches it, record the number on the ruler displayed just over the thumb. The lower the number, the faster the reaction time is. We're going to conduct 5 trials now with the same volunteer, dropping the ruler from 2 centimetres above their fingers each time. Before we start the experiment, what I'd like you to do is to pause the video and have a think about the variables. So at the bottom of page 12, can you identify the independent variable, the dependent variables? Now you'll have 2 here because if you look on page 14, once we've caught the ruler, we're actually going to convert the catch distance into reaction time. And you will also need to identify your control variables, please. Okay, so let's just check we've got these variables identified correctly. So the independent variable will be how many times the ruler's been caught, so how many drops have been done previously, because obviously we're looking to see if the reaction time improves with practice. For the dependent variables then, we've got 2 of those. So you could either have put catch distance, so that would be measured in centimetres, or reaction time measured in milliseconds. Our control variables then, you should have been able to pick these up from the method. So we've got 3 control variables. Obviously the person, the volunteer, keeping the person the same, that's very important. Their position that they're sitting in needs to remain the same, and also where you drop the ruler from. So you're dropping it from a height of 2 centimetres above the fingers. So the control variables are the person, the position that the person is sitting in, and where the ruler is dropped from. Obviously, to carry out the experiment, we now need to have a results table ready for us to fill our results into. So in the first column, we would put our independent variables. So this is the table that's on page 13. So our independent variable is the drop. There's drop 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We've got 2 columns then for the dependent variables. So in the first one, we're going to put catch distance, and that is in centimetres. And in the last column, we're going to use the table on page 14 to convert that catch distance into a reaction time. And that will be measured in milliseconds. So what I would like you to do now is to carry out this experiment if you're able to. So pause the video, get a set of results and fill in the results table. For those of you that haven't been able to get your own set of results, I'm going to fill in a set into the table. So we've got 11, 10, 8, 9 and 7. So if we use the conversion table now to change those into milliseconds, for 11 it would be 150 milliseconds, 10 is 140, 8 is 130, 9 again is 140, and 7 would be 120. We can now then look at the questions that we've got at the bottom of page 14. So these would be our conclusion. So do your results support the hypothesis that reaction times improve with practice? If we look at the results we've got there on the screen, it would suggest we're seeing a slight improvement there with practice. Obviously, drop number 4 is a bit of an anomaly, but in general, our results are showing that reaction time is improving with practice. Obviously, we may expect that if we'd done some more drops, it could start going back up again as the person becomes maybe tired, and that would make the reaction time potentially then go back up. The next question then on page 14 asks you to compare your results with other groups in the class. So are they reproducible? So if you've got a set of results, compare them with my results and see if you think they are reproducible. Maybe you are in contact with some other people in your class and you could ask them about their results to see if your results are reproducible or not. But the important point with this question is for you to remember that if you are asked about whether results are reproducible, it's about comparing your results with other groups. Obviously, to check if your results were repeatable, you would need to do the experiment again. The last question then asks you what other independent variables could you use in this experiment? So there's a number of different things we could look at. So other sort of things that might affect reaction time would be someone's age. So you could test to see whether there is a change in reaction time as people get older. We could look if there is a difference in reaction times between males and females. Or could there be potentially a difference in reaction times depending on how physically fit somebody is? So if they're used to playing a sport where you've got to react very quickly, are their reaction times better than someone who doesn't play as much sport? We could also, and we've done this previously in class, is to have a look at the effect of something like caffeine on reaction time. So obviously caffeine is a stimulant drug and it should speed up your reaction time. So there's just a few other ideas there of some independent variables that we could use for this experiment. Okay, so for the rest of this lesson, what we're going to do now is some past paper questions based on the work that we've covered in these first 3 lessons. So in your booklets, we're looking at pages 15 to 17. So what I would like you to do is to pause the video, complete the work on pages 15 to 17, and that includes a QWC response where we're looking at a reflex action, and then come back to the video and we'll have a look at the answers that you should have. Okay, so hopefully now you've had a look and completed the questions that we have on pages 15 to 17. So if we start with the question on page 15, we've got Gareth taking a penalty kick. He watches the moving ball speed towards the goal. The list below describes how the nervous system takes part in some of the above events, but they're not in the correct order. So we've got the impulses pass along neurons, the receptor cells respond to this stimulus, light from the moving ball strikes receptor cells in his eye, the central nervous system processes the information, and electrical impulses are produced. So the first thing you were asked to do was to place those 5 statements in the correct order. So you should have for this one 3, so light from the moving ball strikes receptor cells in his eye. 2, the receptor cells respond to this stimulus. 5, electrical impulses are produced. 1, the impulses pass along neurons. And then finally, number 4, the central nervous system processes the information. For question B then, the eye is a sense organ. State the name of one other sense organ and the stimulus it detects. Obviously, there's a few examples here. So this is from the mark scheme from the exam board. So 1 mark for the sense organ, 1 for the correct stimulus. So you could have the ear and the stimulus would be sound or vibrations, but they won't accept noise. You could have mentioned either the tongue or the nose, which would be detecting chemicals, and the skin, which is able to detect either touch, pain, temperature, or pressure. So if we move on now to page 16, in the list below, which 2 letters represent pathways taken by nerve impulses in reflex actions? So we can, if we have a look firstly at A, we can rule that out because it involves the brain. So we know that a reflex action doesn't involve the brain. If we look at B, information's going from the sensory neuron to the spinal cord and then the motor neuron. So that makes sense as a sequence as part of a reflex action. C then, sensory neuron, spinal cord, receptor. Now, the receptor in that one obviously is in the wrong place. The receptor should be before the sensory neuron. So D then, the retina, which is in the back of the eye, to the brain, and then the eyelid would be an example of nerve impulses in reflex actions. Now, the reason with that one, why it's going to the brain and not the spinal cord, is obviously from the eye, the brain is closer, so it makes the reaction faster. But usually reflex actions don't involve the brain. B, name an example of each of the 2 reflex actions given as your answer to A. So for the first one, for letter B, sensory neuron, spinal cord, motor neuron would be something like the knee-jerk reflex action or your withdrawal response. So when you're touching something hot, then you withdraw very quickly. For D, obviously because that's happening in the eye, the reflex there would be blinking. So opening and closing the eyelid really quickly. So if something's coming towards your face, you will blink to stop it going into the eye. So the last question you were asked to do then on page 17 was to define a reflex action. Describe the reflex arc involved in the blinking response to a flashing light. And it tells you there that diagrams will not be credited. So you can't draw out the reflex arc. You need to put it into sentences. So if we have a look at the mark scheme for this one. So at the top where it says indicative content, that's the sort of scientific knowledge that they'd be looking for in your answer. So firstly, explaining what a reflex action is. So it's a rapid or fast, involuntary, protective response to a stimulus. So you've mentioned that it's fast, it's involuntary, so you're obviously not deciding to do it, and that they are a protective response. Now we mentioned those 3 features of reflex actions back on page 7. So that's for the first bit, so defining what it is, and then you needed to describe the reflex arc. So as we talked about last lesson, the first step of a reflex arc is the stimulus. So you need to say what the stimulus is. Okay, so in this example, light is the stimulus. Cells then, receptor cells in the back of the eye, so in the retina, would be the receptors. So they would be detecting the stimulus. The next step in the reflex arcs, remember you need to have these in the correct order. So it's stimulus, receptor, then the sensory neuron sends an impulse to the relay neuron, which is within the spinal cord. There is also then a bullet point for mentioning that goes via a synapse. So between the end of the sensory neuron and the beginning of the relay neuron, there is a synapse. From the relay neuron then, saying that the information is passed to the motor neuron, and then the motor neuron takes the impulse to the muscles in the eyelid, which would be the effector. So as I said in the last video, it's that sequence that is really important. So stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, mentioning that there's a synapse there, motor neuron, and then effector, which causes the response and would cause the blinking. So with these questions, obviously, though, it's not just about including the indicative content. So for 5 to 6 marks, you construct an articulate, integrated account, correctly linking relevant points, such as those in the indicative content, which shows sequential reasoning. So particularly with these sorts of questions, where these things do happen in a sequence, it's important that you have that sequence correct. The answer fully addresses the question with no irrelevant inclusions or significant omissions, and you've used appropriate scientific terminology and accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar for between 5 and 6 marks. For 3 to 4 marks, the candidate construction account correctly linking some relevant points, such as those in the indicative content, showing some reasoning. The answer addresses the question, but with some omissions. So maybe you've missed out 2 or 3 of those bullet points. The candidate uses mainly appropriate scientific terminology and some accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar. And then for 1 to 2 marks, some relevant points have been made, such as those in the indicative content. So maybe you've only got 2 or 3 of those bullet points, but there's limited reasoning. It addresses the question, but with significant omissions. So there's key information that's missing. The candidate uses limited scientific terminology and inaccuracies in spelling, punctuation and grammar. And then for 0 marks would be if you didn't make any attempt or that none of the information that was written down was relevant to the answer. So that brings us up now to the end of the work on the nervous system. Next time then we'll be moving on to look at how your body regulates conditions inside. Thank you.